Hi, thank you guys for being here with us today. I'm Penny Beeman with Yooper, Paws of Love, and we have kind of a special gathering today, so I will let my co-partner Cindy introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Cindy Campbell with Cindy Campbell Dog Training, and Penny and I are here with a wonderful special guest.
Yes, so we are pleased to be able to bring to you the author, creator of Dog-Centered Care, and he does a lot of other things in the dog training world. So I'm going to kind of just turn it over to Andy. You can go ahead and introduce yourself, Andy Hale.
Well, thank you both of you. And just to start, I love what you're doing with your work and your kind of projects and the outreach stuff. So it's great to be here today. So I'm a certified animal behaviorist over here in the UK. I've got a human psychology background. So, and I did that for about 15 years. I've been working with animals for about 15 years. And for me, my passion, on whether it was with humans or dogs, is about how we are better equipped to be truly available to the care and support needs of another, and what there is there that might block us from doing that, and some of the complications there. So that's very much my kind of angle. And my dog-centered care group is a space where there's some stuff that I put in there, of course, but lots of people share lots of different things, because we're starting to look at animal behavior more widely, but dog behavior more specifically, in a more holistic way. We're looking at it in a multidiscipline way. There's a lot of really exciting stuff going on, and that's what I try and focus in on. So that's a little bit about me, really.
Perfect. Well, we want to thank you for doing this, because it does mean a lot to us to bring in some people that are not in our normal circle, that like we probably have the same 100 people that we do a lot of different things with. So it's nice to bring in an outside voice that's not normally in our circle. So thank you. And so I think we should probably just dive right in. And I know probably one of the most important things that you've had an impact with me as a trainer is the way that you explain the whole emotional experience and meeting people with where they are. So if you want to just kind of go over that and what that means, you know, the emotional experience. I understand what that means, but our viewers probably don't. So.
Okay, well, when we think about emotions and emotionality more widely, it can seem a little bit subjective or a little bit very broad. You know, Carolina Westland, who is an amazing behavioral scientist over here in Europe, she's identified with others something like 90 different definitions of emotions, for example, and over 30 different ideas of what consciousness is. It all gets very complicated, right? So I like to keep things really simple. So for me, the emotional experience is just that. So all of us will have our own ways of interpreting and experiencing the sensations that we have, the feelings that we have, the way that we perceive the world around us, things that might, all us three here in this virtual space, we could all be in the same place at the same time, doing the same thing, but be affected by it very differently. And that's the emotional experience. And what I love about talking about it this way, it cuts through a lot of the stuff that's been kind of thrown out there, especially working with animals and dogs specifically, that, well, hang on, we don't know how the dog thinks or feels, so we're not going to go there. We're just going to look purely at behavioral output, whether we can get the dog to do more of that or do less of that. But the thing about the emotional experience is this: two things. One is we all have one. So we all have one, the dog will have one, the cat will have one, the horse will have one. But secondly, and importantly, they are all unique to us as individuals. So whilst, yes, I don't know what my dog thinks or feels, but does that matter? And should it stop me from trying to be more available to what their truth might be, their emotional truth? So, you and I are the same species, Penny, but I wouldn't dream to presume that I know what your emotional experience is. So should I not be available to that? Should I just think, what can I get Penny to do or not do that fits my narrative, that fits my outlook? And this is the important thing for me about the emotional experience, about trying to be more available to the emotional truths of others. And when we think about the relationship with dogs, with my working with dogs, that includes the caregiver, the owner, the guardian, whatever you want to call the person who has that connection. I know you do a lot of work with people who have dogs as service dogs or therapy dogs. And we have two nervous systems at play there. We have the handler, owner, caregiver, guardian, whatever label you want to use it, and the dogs. And both will have an emotional experience, and both will have an emotional truth. And with the more we can connect to that, the more we can truly be able to offer the right care and support needs. It's no point if I think, for example, with you, Cynthia, that Cynthia's upset. I know what's best for Cynthia. If I do this, she'll feel better. Great. Now I'm doing that from a good point of view, right? Because I care for you, Cynthia, and I want you to feel better. But have I truly been available to your care and support needs, or have I just projected what I think is best for you? And equally, you know, I might think, oh, Penny's really misbehaving today. It's not unusual, right? But she's really misbehaving today. So I must get her to stop it because it's not right. It's naughty. It's bad. But how much of that is a reflection on Penny's behavior, or is it on my narrative? The fact that I'm just a bit annoyed by you. Do you see what I mean? But if I was to be more,
we all get annoyed with the things that we see in our day-to-day life, whether it be with our partner, whether it be with our dogs. There's always something that annoys us. So being able to look past our annoyance to see, all right, what do they really mean by that, as far as how can I help them with that instead of making it worse?
Definitely. And I think this is the thing. So being available to the truth of another, a couple of really important things about this. First of all, it's hard to actually, because our brain isn't designed for that necessarily. So the human brain doesn't like to have to keep reappraising much, and it just wants to stay connected, but wants to stay connected in a safe way. So it's about survival, obviously. So we create a worldview over time. There's multiple things that go into that worldview, those belief systems, those value systems, all those kind of things. And once the brain has decided that's a kind of a safe thing, I'll keep that as my worldview, it wants to protect that. And that's where we have our cognitive biases and dissonance and cognitive distortions, because, you know, the brain thinks, this is my worldview. And this is where the judgments then come from, the expectations that we have, that the behavior of others, if we're thinking in the kind of way of thinking about from a behavioral point of view, the behavior of others, my expectations are the behaviors of others should match that in order to keep that brain feeling safe. So the brain doesn't want to have to keep reappraising that, because it would be exhausting. If we had to keep rethinking things all the time, it would be exhausting. So the brain's like, I don't want to do it. So this is why we end up with such polarized views over here in the UK, Brexit, over there, Trump, whatever it is. It's like people just automatically have a quick thinking judgment without actually giving themselves the opportunity to reappraise or to think about what other factors might be involved in other people's opinions and all these other things. So it's hard, right? It's just hard. That's the first thing. Secondly, to truly be available to the care and support needs of another, you really need to be in a well-regulated place yourself. So if we use just a very simple couple of terms, elevation, nervous system engaging, decompression, nervous system disengaging. The more elevated we are, the less available we can be to other people's needs. It's just a fact. So when you're involved in human therapy, you have to be quite well regulated yourself, because you can't, you know, and this is why when you're working with a client, for example, if something they've said has kind of really annoyed you, you'll feel your heart rate going, right? And you can feel your hands getting a bit sweaty because you're like, oh my God, they said the D word, for example. So we have to be right, because as soon as we get elevated, I'm now not listening to them, because everything's going through my quick thinking brain now, and I'm hearing all sorts of stuff that isn't really true. So this is why it can be difficult. We have to practice this stuff. One thing that's very important is we have to allow an element of self-care, because you know, I say often, because I think it's important to, have I ever shouted at my dogs? Yes, because they piss me off. sometimes. This is just what happens, right? Because we get into that. I shout to my husband sometimes. We just do, right? And we can't beat ourselves up for all that all the time because it's not realistic. We are at the mercy of our nervous system, just like our dogs are. And this is what I love about the emotional experience when I work with people, because we all have one, right? So I use two very simple analogies. The first one is about how we process. So I used a doors of the brain analogy. So imagining the brain has lots of little doors in it. The more doors that are open, the better chance we have to calmly and safely process and have a chance of self-regulating from that processing. Pain and stress, big door closers. So the more stressed you are, the less doors you have open. Same for our dogs, right? Second is the nervous system. I use a good old bucket analogy. So the empty bucket's the nervous system. The more the stuff in the bucket is how much the nervous system goes up. So anything can go in the bucket. The bucket is non-judgmental. It could be excitement. It could be lack of sleep. It could be pain. It could be all sorts. But the reality is, the fuller the bucket, the less doors we have open. This is what I was saying a minute ago. If we're not in a well-regulated state, the more elevated we are. So elevation, bucket filling, decompression, bucket draining. The more elevated we are, the less doors we have, and so the less we can be available to others. So this is just the reality of it. And because we all can think about that, I always start with listening to the client first. So I have a session just hearing the caregiver's point of view, because they will have an emotional truth and I have to be available to it. And this is my CAKE acronym: compassion, awareness, knowledge, and empathy. So I always bring CAKE because it's a good place to start. Compassion is always a great place to start. And one thing to think about, compassion is not condoning. You know, the fact that somebody is doing something with their dog or using a tool or whatever, by me being compassionate enough to listen to their story is not me then condoning what they're doing. I'm just saying, I want to hear you, because we all want to be heard, right? And and then awareness is very important, because I have to become aware of what that truth is. I have to be aware of what it is they're saying. We were talking about this off air a little bit. You know, I worked with a lady recently who was using quite harsh aversive with her dog, and when she was talking to me, she was using words like discipline and correction and all those kind of words, and I had to encourage her to keep talking. I had to let her speak in the vocabulary that she has. But when we actually looked at it together and kind of drilled it down, what she was saying was, I want to keep my dog safe. Great, I agree. You know, that's the point that I can, yeah, that's where we can connect with. So that's awareness. Knowledge is very important, because we obviously bring some knowledge, but getting knowledge of the other person and what they're going through and the other factors that build in. Sometimes many people bring their own experiences and often their own trauma actually to the situation of their careship of their dog. And then empathy. It's just like, I hear you. I hear you. I get it. I get why you're using that tool. I hear you. So bringing CAKE is always good. I have, because here in the UK, us Brits, we love tea, right? So we don't have CAKE without tea. So that's my other acronym.
Everybody loves cake. So,
everybody loves
yeah.
CAKE, and try tea if you haven't already. I did try and make an acronym out of coffee, but I just couldn't think of enough words to fill it. So anyway, it's tea. But tea is really important. So you brought the CAKE. So that's the first point of just turning up. But by the way, it's the same with the dog, right? When I meet the dog, so I meet the human first. I want to hear their experience. They got to tell me stuff. And it's amazing, even your kind of blokey blokes, as I call them, the ones who don't share much. If you give them the time, they'll share a lot, actually, because they're as I say, we're all affected by it. Then I frame the emotional experience in a very neutral way. So I introduce the principle of it, and then I use my doors of the brain analogy and the bucket analogy. One of the big words that I use a lot is the word relief, because in my opinion, it's probably one of the most important words in the psychology of behavior. Is, you know, in training geeky circles, we use terms like distance increasing behaviors and different bits and how we want to frame it. But what we don't talk about is relief seeking behaviors. How often these behaviors from the dog, they're seeking relief. The humans, when I meet them, the reason they've called is because they want relief, right? They want relief. So using these words are really important, creating a vocabulary. Then I usually mirror that back to the caregiver. So I'm like, right, so when we think back to what you said to me, then your bucket must be pretty full in that situation. I bet you haven't got many doors open. Like the number of clients who they've been out with a dog and somebody said something quite unkind to them or something quite judgmental. And then when they get home, they can think of half a dozen things they wish they'd said back, right? That's because when they're in the situation at the time, they haven't got enough doors open. When we start talking in terms of the doors now, a lot of adolescent dogs, what we know about the brain is that the parts of the brain that help to moderate our behavior, and dogs don't come online until the end of adolescence. In humans, it's our early 20s. So some of those doors aren't even open for those young dogs yet. You know, all these kind of things now, we have a language that the caregivers can visualize. The last entity I see is the dog, actually, because when I do meet the dog now, I have a vocabulary. I can say, look at that. See how he's doing that? See how he's seeking relief there? So this is the thing then about the emotional experience and how great it is to connect through the emotional experience. So coming back to the T is time. So you've brought cake, then you need to give time. You need to give time for that person to share. The same when I meet a dog, I need to give that dog time to tell me stuff. Because the dog has a truth and I need to try and be available to it. We'll come on to dogs specifically in a minute. The E is encourage. I need to encourage the person. If the person, I've given them time, I need to encourage them. I need to ask the questions that invites them to continue talking. Very quickly, I think, especially on our side of the community where we fought very hard to try and get people to not think of the dominance model or use certain words. It's very hard not to say, well, actually, we don't say that anymore, or actually, we don't do that anymore. We need to encourage them. And then finally, the A is the most important one, and that is acknowledge. It's that kind of empathy bit, you know, it's that, I hear you. What you're telling me is, so with that lady, she had all that, and I could say to her, so I think if tell me if I'm right here, but I think what you're telling me is you want to keep the dog safe. Yes, great. That's what we need to focus in on then. So
we had a big thing yesterday with, so Cam, the dog you saw come in and join me. Yeah, I was sure it was him. I have to. He is a rescue from years and years ago. He's been with us probably close to 7 years now, and had anxiety up the wall, but now his big anxiety is thunderstorms. So yesterday we had thunderstorms on and off all day long. So his anxiety, his stress bucket was overflowing all day long, no matter what, which means typically he's the dog that I can take outside off leash, let him roam. We have property, you know, he's very reliable, does everything I would want from a dog. But on days like that, I know that when he needs to go out to go potty, and we only go out those few times that I know he needs to, but then he gets a short leash, he's close to me, because that's what brings him that relief. That's the only thing he wants in that day, is to be by me. So if he's more than even just 3 or 4 feet away from me, his bucket starts to fill up again. And if he can be less than 2 feet away from me, his bucket starts to empty. So I really spent most of the day just being with him. Now, granted, I can do anything I need to do during the day because he'll join me with anything, but he's the dog that I typically, like, he doesn't go out in public with me because of his anxiety. We have property and we have wilderness for him to explore without needing to constantly expose him to the triggers that bother him. So we do that, and he's wonderful and totally different on our property. So that's where we stay. And so yesterday became a home day. Most of my appointments were on Zoom and housework and stuff like that. And he just joins me everywhere I go. Well, again, that then starts to raise my stress bucket, because now I have this dog within 2 feet of me all day long. So yeah, there's times where I'm like, can't you just back off a little bit? Give me some me time. But he just really didn't have it in him. So it's reminding myself that, all right, this is what gives him relief. If this is what gives him relief, it's really not that hard for me to just deal with it. Now, you see, today, he's a good, 10 feet away from me, chilling in bed, behaving just like he would on any normal day, because we allowed him that time. If he had been home alone or shut in or anything separated away from me yesterday, he wouldn't be so chill today. He'd still be very anxious. So giving him that time to process and realize that, all right, we've worked on thunderstorms a lot. We used to do a whole lot of treat feeding and stuff between it, but I found out the treats really weren't helping him in that situation. He is very treat motivated, but in that situation, all he really wants is me. So I let him have that, and I let him take care of himself in the best way that he can do. And I give him the support I can. So I want to meet him where he is. And most of the time he's wonderful. So that really kind of brings to point the ways that you can apply that with what your dog needs. And my other dog, Azul, he's my actual service dog that goes with me everywhere. He very rarely has a full stress bucket because things just don't stress him out. But we make sure that we take a lot of the sniffabouts and kind of just general dog time. You know, since we do have property, we have fields where he can go out and dig up whatever creatures he wants to try to dig up. He finds random scraps from the coyotes and eagles, and you know, he does his dog stuff a lot during the day, and that's his outlet. And that allows us to be the better team, that allows us to work out in public and do what we need to do, because we're taking care of each other's needs and making sure our needs are met. So that's my big mission, is teamwork. Everything I'm about is teamwork. You don't want a dog that just blindly obeys you. You want a dog that enjoys being with you and you enjoy being with them. So you have to work as a team to accomplish that. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, your place sounds amazing. I want to come and visit. You've just beautifully shown that there's a principle called alignment, and that's where we find that middle ground, where we are aware of each other's needs, and we make compromises, and that's truly what you're talking about there. And I think what was beautiful about talking about the dog you have with the thunder issues is we have to be available enough to see what it is the dog needs, and what the dog needs at that moment is that closeness. Now that nervous system is still racing, like you say, but that dog copes better with that closeness, with that ability to be able to be with you. And because that allows you more room to cope with the fact that he's just your shadow for that time, because you kind of know why. And this is why I think we've got to be better at educating the general public, caregivers, about this, because what has kind of happened in the last, I don't know about in the States, but over here in the UK in the last, say, 30 years, 40 years, where we've had more of a prominence of dog training, because it never used to be a thing, really. We had over here in the UK, we had Barbara Woodhouse back in the 70s, and people might go to a club on a Saturday afternoon to do a little bit of stuff, but it wasn't taken that seriously. But what we've done is we've convinced everybody that the most important thing is an obedient dog, is a well-trained dog. Now, the thing is that it's not that training a dog isn't important, it is, but it's not the most important thing, because the problem there is anything that the dog does now becomes an obedience issue. So you ask the dog to sit, it won't do it, it's a training issue. The dog pulls on the lead, it's a training issue. The dog barks, it's a training issue. So we're just trying to, the caregivers don't know what it is that they need to provide their dog relief. And even using positive reinforcement, and this is very important, we know about the fallout from aversive training, but even positive reinforcement, we have to bear in mind that we can risk getting a dog to do something else instead, but without giving them relief. And so the caregivers, I think it's a crazy situation we've got into, where the general public know how to teach their dog to sit, but they don't know what pain looks like in a dog. They can do a great downstay, but they don't know what stress looks like in a dog. We've kind of got our priorities wrong a little bit, and this is what all of us, us three, are passionate about, is just trying to address the balance. I get a lot of stuff thrown at me like, oh, he's the guy who says we shouldn't train dogs, he's the guy who reckons we should let dogs get on with it. Of course, none of that's true, but it's interesting how people perceive that, because it isn't about any of that. Do I use reinforcement training? Yes. And actually, when I'm working with a dog, if I'm going to reinforce anything, I do behavioral cases. I don't do kind of functional training as such, but I just want to think, if I'm going to reinforce anything in this dog, I want to do really good observations first and try and learn as much as I can about that unique individual in front of me, so that I can reinforce behaviors that actually have innate value to that dog and will help them to self-regulate, not just get them to do something else instead. And that's the holy grail, self-regulation. We want that dog to kind of think, I can deal with this better. They might still be stressed. So thunderstorms are a great example, right? Fireworks, all these kind of things. Dogs are likely to get stressed. Many animals are going to get stressed. It's how we support that nervous system so that the dog can kind of regulate better and work through it. And I think, I think that's important, just to kind of think about the big distinction really there is about the behaviors that have innate value. We can have a whole conversation now about the difference between structured learning and experimental learning, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cindy.
I've been on, Penny knows about this. I've been on a journey this last year, 2.5 years. I have a poodle that's now 2.5, and I specifically asked for a dog with a high drive, and I'm getting the fallout of having a high drive dog that's going to be my service dog. So I've really had to learn a lot about teaching him how to manage how he feels, and so that we can get along in public. And it's amazing. It's been an amazing journey with him. I've learned a lot, and just watching him, go from I can't handle seeing a squirrel to, oh, it's a squirrel, I'm a little bit excited, I'm gonna do a little bit of this, and then he stops. It's amazing. And I wish more people would see that and understand that you can do that, and you don't have to do anything that the dog doesn't enjoy.
Well, I think we have a tendency in our community, our dog training world, especially on the geeky side of stuff, to go down a bit of an absolutist route, or route, as you say there, and have a very specific picture of what that must look like. But quite often we're forcing that dog's square peg into some kind of unrealistic round hole. And I love how you frame that there, Cynthia. And I love the honesty there as well. It's like, yeah, I want to have this high drive dog, so great. And then when you get one, you think, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And especially when we think about dogs who we want them to play a role for us, we have to really see what dog is looking at us today, and what is, to what extent can they do that role today? Some days, I'm sure you find this, they can do, the dog can do more than others, and a lot of that is where that nervous system is. And so yeah, understanding this stuff is very important. And the brain, what we know from wonderful people now, like Dr. Kathy Murphy, Dr. Amber Batson, all these kind of people who are sharing a lot of the neurology, the neuroscience, especially when dogs are younger, the juvenile social mammal brain, so that's us, that's the dog, is designed to dysregulate. That first 12 months, like Kathy Murphy says, Mother Nature's given that young puppy's brain at each developmental stage the right amount of processing that it needs to do in order to learn what it needs to learn. But Mother Nature doesn't really know much on the structured learning. Mother Nature only really provides experimental learning. And in fact, experimental learning, of course, or environmental learning, whichever title you want to use, is the oldest form of learning. You learn by doing and working stuff out. So what do we do, though? We've put a huge emphasis on that first 12 months of convincing the general public that the most important thing is structured learning. And so it's not a case of either or, it's about getting the balance right. Because Molly, who's our young Labrador, she's only just turned 12 months. She came to us at 16 weeks. She'd already had 2 homes at 16 weeks, bless her. And she was a big puppy biter, more than normal. She was kind of Molly Shark, we called her, or the Molly Gator, whichever we decided to call her. And that's because she was really stressed through a lot of, or even at that young age, she had a very specific view, or a very specific idea of what she needed social engagement to look like from a social processing point of view. And we had to learn that from her. The expectations were on us, not on her. And I didn't do any functional training, teaching of cues, if you like, until she was about 10 months old. Deliberately so. I just, we made sure that she had lots of opportunities to do the experimental learning she needed to do in a safe way, because we put a huge emphasis on this notion of a quiet, compliant dog, whereas the emphasis should be on a calm, well-regulated dog, and that's what we've done for her. But it's just getting the balance right. That's the point, isn't it, Cynthia? It's getting that balance right, just trying to find things out. And as if you see everything as an obedience thing, you will see everything as an obedience issue, and then it becomes a battle of wills. That's all it ends up being.
I have a client that has 3 German Shepherds, and they're all ages 1 to 3 years old, so they're all really young. And it was really neat to see that, like, yeah, they've done some basics, like more or less behaviors that are needed to survive the household. Some of the simple sit down and, easy, not pulling me down the street kind of behaviors. But other than that, these 3 dogs are open books. So it's very rare for me to come across clients that have dogs that are, older than a year old, that are virtually open books, willing to accept anything. So it was really neat to sit. I spent probably 3 hours with them, just sitting and playing with their dogs and figuring out, how they're motivated and all of that. And that's where I say I'm the science nerd, because I love doing that, being able to see each individual dog for who they are and what they need. And I love that they're open, and now they're ready to accept anything I want to give to them. And actually, I gave them, I think, 3 homework assignments, and I've seen video on 2 of the 3, and they're doing amazing. And just the whole overall nature of the household has shifted as these dogs are starting to open up now into what they can actually accomplish, what they can get out of life when they apply themselves, instead of just the free for all, let me wrestle with my brother, which is all fun and good. But they now know that they can also enjoy and get more enrichment out of life by engaging and doing that kind of thing. So, I mean, I just love that whole process of working with that dog to figure out who they are, what their desires are, and what their motivations can be. I do use treats when I'm training, but my goal is to find something where I don't have to use treats with training. I want to be able to find what that dog truly wants more than just that food, and use that in their training. So you actually hit right on that right point when you started talking about Molly, because that was going to be my next question, because I know that you've done a lot with her as far as letting her explore and enjoy and getting to know her surroundings. So you jumped right into that almost perfectly.
Well, this is the thing. This is, and I love I love how you frame that again, and I think it's really important, and it's allowing that time. And one of the most important things about truly being available to the emotional truth of another is to give that time and to slow things down. And we've got very good in the training community about how to do things quicker, how to do things faster, how to, but actually sometimes you just need to take a breath and think, right, I'm just going to do really good observations here and give myself the time to let that person and the dog tell me stuff. Because if you're already thinking, oh yeah, this is this type of case, or this is this type of dog, or I already know what I'm going to go and see, anything you see then will be based on that filter. So you'll end up just kind of that kind of confirmatory bias, rather than just thinking, good observations should be done without judgment or label. They should be just I'm just going to let it be, and whatever I see, I'm just going to let it play out. But yeah, Molly, this is the thing with Molly. So not doing something is actually quite a skill. Actually, it's very easy to do something. Knowing when not to do something takes it takes a bit of a skill. It takes a bit of practice, I guess. And with Molly, we definitely we learned from her very quickly. Say she was very heavy on the biting, and so we had to kind of work that out pretty quick, what was going on for her. I say this expectational thing, 0 expectation on the dog, always expectation on us, because we have to work stuff out. And it was definitely that she had a very specific thing. We have to separate, in my opinion, social processing from social engagement, because the two things are different. Social processing is about social threat evaluation Even at that young age, you already had a very specific criteria, if you like, of what that social processing needed to be for her. And then social engagement is different. And imagine a lot of dogs, right, who people think, I'm going to go and take my dog out and socialize them, take them loads of places. We live on a beach here. I can see the beach from here. And, you know, in the winter, the dogs are allowed on the beach and it's just a free for all, right? You see very few well-regulated dogs down there. It's like it being in a dog park, I suppose. It's just lots of elevated dogs. But if you've got a young dog who is more socially sensitive, so there's two things I think about: social sensitivity and whether a dog's socially conflicted. So social sensitivity is very much about that processing. And if a dog needs more time and space to process and go through that social threat evaluation, but they just keep getting social engagement thrown on all the time, which happens a lot, right? Because all the dogs keep running over, people keep trying to touch them. This is where a lot of these challenges we have when dogs are older, you know, when they're coming through adolescence or older than that, when we have that kind of reactive dog. I'll put my fingers in the air there because I don't like the word very much, but it can be very easy to think that a dog who might lunge and bark at another dog is fearful of other dogs. Some dogs might be. Some of them might, though. It's just because that nervous system has thought, you know, I can't do my processing before social engagement comes, and I need to defend myself against social engagement. And when you start to break that down and start supporting that dog to let them know you can do the processing. Laura Donaldson, of course, with her slow thinking reappraisal work, it's amazing. And I think we've got a big emphasis on pain and behavior, or physiology and behavior at the moment. I think the next big thing will be about processing, social processing specifically. But anyway, coming back to Molly, we worked that out for her and we were able to help her. And it's really hard, right, with puppies, because everybody wants to flipping come and touch your puppy, right? And two things really shocked me, actually, because it's been a long time since I've had a puppy. The first is how many people don't even ask. They're just like, oh, puppy, hi, puppy. And then secondly, when people do ask and you say no, how affronted they are that you dared to say no. But anyway, so yeah, so we had to manage that fact. And then we've never had to teach her loose leash walking, because we really got that nervous system to come down the longer she's with us. We went out to quiet spaces. So we've got the beach here, but she's only started going on the beach at about 9 or 10 months old, because it would have been too much initially. So we went to quiet spaces where she could either be on a long line or she could be offline and just mooch. And she really got into mooching, and that was her big thing. So that nervous system was already pretty good. So when she's on the leash, if I feel pulling on the leash, I know that's a sign of elevation from her, that she's starting to elevate a little bit. We haven't had to worry about doing the jumping up people thing, because we soon addressed, once we started to get the social processing preferences supported for her, she could do her sniff and go. So if she comes over to somebody now, she'll go over, wiggly bum, she's a Labrador, she's like, hey, wiggly bum, appeasement, but she'll get her sniff and she knows she can sniff first, then she'll move on. If somebody keeps putting pressure on her, that's when you might see a bit of a jump up, and that's why I know why it's happening. But when you think about a lot of the things that we have with puppies, I believe we put them into lots of over-arousing situations that trigger pulling, trigger jumping up, trigger a lot of situations. Now they become training problems. So we've got to train all that out. But maybe it was the pressure the puppy was under in the first place that was causing some of these issues. Question mark. Every dog's different though, and this is I'm very keen to stress this. Molly's story is Molly's story. It may be different for Rover or Rex or whoever else, but if we're available to that, we've got to learn, especially puppies, we have to learn from them first, not go diving in, getting them to learn stuff. And as I say, we put a big emphasis on structured education in that first 12 months. We don't even do that with human kids, right? Kids don't go to a structured educational process until they're, 4 or 5 here in the UK. I don't know what it's like over there. Because we recognize that they need to learn experimentally when they're young. They need to connect. They need to connect through play. I love what you said earlier, Penny, about just getting down and playing with the dogs. It's a really natural way for dogs to suss stuff out. I love Sarah Fisher's free work. Free work is awesome.
Yes.
Especially for noise sensitivity work, actually, because unlike the traditional counter conditioning stuff we might do, one of the kind of things that we kind of know more of now with free work is how it helps the sensor integration process more generally. So that dog's in a really good place with good doors open, right? To listen. I was working with a dog recently who was going in the garden and just barking because they had kids one side, dogs the other, and every time the dog would go out, it'd be like, because he's in that kind of state. We started doing free work in the home, started introducing in the garden. Guess what? The same noises were there, but rather than have that instant nervous system response, ears, the auditory system was able to take in, and also starting taking in the sense. And the dog would do some free work and then might go over to the fence. In the early stages, we might have the odd woof, but the dog would return to the free work. So now the free work got less and less, and now the dog can go in the garden because it's finally managed to process stuff in the environment and allow it to be in that subconscious rather than it be that trigger stuff all the time. So all these things come into play when we start thinking about sensor integration, processing. But we have to start from learning from that individual dog first about what their emotional experience might be. You'll never know. The only emotional experience we can truly validate is our own. And that's a very important little point just on this bit, just to finish off on that, because it's okay being available to the truths of others and trying to be more compassionate and be less judgmental. But that should start with us first. Look in the mirror and do it for us, because we're hard on ourselves. Most of the expectational and judgmental stuff that we put on us, that we struggle with, is the stuff we put on ourselves. And especially in our community, it's a hard community to navigate sometimes. It's not the friendliest at times, and it can be very difficult and challenging. And so, yeah, bring cake for yourself. Eat cake on your own. You know, you can always bring cake for you. You can have cake for one. It's a good place.
I love that. And that is a really good place to end, because as you said, especially in the service dog community, people are very harsh with each other. So you have to be able to allow yourself to do you. You know, there's not one set of rules. There's a very few rules in the United States as far as service dogs that have to be done. And that's governed by our ADA, or American with Disabilities Act. But it's very, very minor. Everything else is self-imposed by service dog teams or service dog programs, or, you know, just what we expect that a service dog should behave like. And while I agree that service dogs need to have some level of behavior before they're out in a public setting, what that behavior looks like is going to be individualized to each team.
Mm-hmm.
So they should not do some of the bad behaviors as far as that might be threatening to other people. But other than that, every behavior that's done out in the real world setting should be what works for that team. So that's something that we really try to stress a lot, is that you don't have to do it my way. This is what I do. This is what works for me. Let's see if we can use something to figure out what will work for you. Go ahead, Cindy.
I was just going to say, and I know you teach different behaviors than I do for managing the service dogs in public, because there's certain things you can do just that may or may not make your life easier. And I share what makes my life easier with my students, and Penny shares what makes her life easier with her students. And it may look completely different, or it may look exactly the same. And
a lot of that does depend on the dog side of the things, because as Cindy said, her dog is very high drive, and that's what she wanted. My last service dog was very high drive, so I went the opposite this way. And this time my service dog is very low drive. Like, he just got a fitness tracker and he averages only about 5,000 to 6,000 steps a day, which is really low for a dog because he spends so much time in downtime. Now, he'll do more if I'm more active and he wants, you know, I'm out and about, he wants to do it. He gladly can have a high drive day, but he's also very content just to chill and be wherever I'm at. So that really impacts the way that we have to then work with helping those dogs out in public, because that high drive dog is going to need to learn different skills versus what my low drive, calmer natured, happy-go-lucky dog is going to need to learn.
I spent a good portion of time teaching my dog to be calm and relaxed and lay on a bed. And just because I knew he was going to have to sit under a chair or different places when I go out. So, and I just wanted to comment about you didn't realize how many people want to touch your dog when you're out and about. Would you say it's probably, you get that every time you take your dog out, when you take your service dog out, just about, Penny, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah. And I mean, that's another difference between our dogs, is that Azul absolutely loves that social interaction. So it's not pressure
And
for him. And I've
and
actually had to like separate, like, all right, in this environment, we don't go see people, but in this environment, yeah, go see all the people you want, to be able to make that work for him, because he needs that social outlet. But yeah, we
and
step out of the car no matter where we're at, and somebody screams, puppy, puppy, puppy.
or
So
poodle, 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 because I have mine in cords, which you don't see around here much. And I get comments, people are always commenting on him, but we get comments all the time, and
Mm.
it doesn't matter where we are. I've been taking classes, and in the middle of classes, one of the classes I take is in the middle of a pretty big pet store, and it's a rally class, and the instructor competes in rally, and so but she works for PetSmart, so she's under contract. But we end up with people walking through the rally course and stopping to try and talk to me while I'm working with my dog in the middle of a class. So you learn to deal with distractions, but it's one of those things that it's like, no, you can't touch my dog. And he doesn't like it. So it's like, no, you can't.
Mm.
And it's you learn to stand up for your dog in ways that other people may not sometimes.
This comes to the general problem underpinning everything that we see as a challenge, really. So when we think about people who use aversives as a member of public, or people who come over and, when you and your dog are just trying to navigate a space, and it's lack of awareness. There are very few, in my opinion, deliberately cruel or insensitive people out there. They're just unaware. There's a huge lack of awareness out there, and that's why a lot of the stuff that you're doing is so important. And so I just want to say one last thing on ourselves, really, about how just as a general note, we have to recognize that some of the thought processes that we have about ourselves, some of the judgments we have of self, those stories are often written by other people. And they're definitely written by any trauma that we might have experienced. And I wrote a post a bit about this on my own personal timeline recently, because I had a big breakdown in my early 30s. And what I went through to come out the other end was not me reinventing myself or becoming something new. It was actually me finding myself underneath those stories that had been written by my trauma and other people. So it's a really good exercise sometimes just to sit down when you're in a regulated state. It's no point when you're dysregulated. It's when you're regulated, you think, what do I believe in? What are my values? What is it that I seek to do with the world? And just remind yourself of these things, because those are the things that help ground us. And other people's opinions are their business, as they say, and it's true. But I think it's amazing what you guys are doing. And I just one last very quick thing is this word guilt, because I know a lot of people, when we go through that supported awareness with them, so we hear them, we meet them where they are, we support their awareness of their dog's care and support needs, because quite often when we first meet somebody, that awareness might be 180 away from the reality from the dog, because they've already been indoctrinated into the dominance model or whatever it is. People often feel guilt. They feel guilt about how they've done things in the past. And I think we should be kinder on guilt, because guilt for me is often a sign of visceral learning. So I say to people, if you feel guilty, don't feel guilty about feeling guilty. Just recognize that feeling you have shows you've learned something really important, that kind of know better, do better. And I think when you frame that back to somebody, they can feel less of that then. They can think, oh yeah, I get that now. Because otherwise they're going to be stuck in the past all the time. This is about feeling that and thinking, yeah, I've learned something really important here. So when a client of mine says, God, I feel guilty about that, part of me thinks you've learned something then. So that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because you really realize, and I know they're probably going to do differently now. So I just thought I'd leave that as a final point. But it's been great to
and that's
see
great. So we do want to just thank you for joining us and doing this for us, or with us, so that we can kind of bring that message out to more people. That's our goal. We want to be able to help as many people, and not just in the service dog community, but that tends to be where the majority of our clients are based. So that's a message that definitely needs to be heard in the service dog community. So we do really thank you for spending some time with us today and going over this and helping us to understand it a little bit better.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Yep, thank you. So take care, everybody. We will be back. Well, I'm sure we'll be speaking with Andy Hale again. We'll look forward to doing some kind of an event in the future with going over some more details and things. So thank you.
Thank you very much.